Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be tackling Tier 4 Strikers and which characters you need to put in and slot in for your Tier 4s in order to make the most out of these buffs and these attacks. Now, I know what you're thinking, Alex, I don't have like 20 Tier 4s, I only have like 2 or 3. That's fine. If you have just one Tier 4 character, that's enough for this video and all of the information held within it to be relevant to you. Because even if all of your strikers that you're setting are not Tier 4, it still matters what buffs you give them. Because although you have characters, like Sharon Rogers and Miles are going to give 5 out of 6 for Luna here, and Omega Red's only going to give 3 out of 6, there may be situations where Omega Red, or let's say Star-Lord, is actually a better character to use as a Tier 4 striker for Luna in this case, in this example, than it is Miles or Sharon. It's not just about getting the buff to the highest level possible. Don't get me wrong, the buff's really important, whatever the buff may be, but there are a lot of other factors to consider, so let's dive in. First thing you want to remember is that Tier 4 buffs and the strikers are all connected by the instinct. And there's only 4 instincts, and it's fairly simple to remember. You have human hero instincts, you have non-human hero instincts, then you have human villain instincts, and then you have non-human villain instincts. So that's basically the 4 quadrants. You have the 2 humans, heroes and villains, and then you have everyone that's not human, either hero or villain. Now, I used Namor in this example because you're probably wondering, Alex, they turned Namor into a villain with this uniform, so why would he be a non-hero human? Well, he's a mutant for sure, so he's non-human, but it actually doesn't matter what any of the uniforms change the character to. It matters what the base character is. And you can verify this by just looking on the details page and looking right here above my camera. It says Instinct Order. That's all you need to know. And that's going to match other characters who are non-hero humans that have always been heroes, like Professor X, for example. Whether he's in the wheelchair or he's standing up, he's still going to be Order. So for the hero humans, which are characters like, Doctor Strange, Captain America, Sharon Rogers, they're going to be Justice. Then for the non-hero humans, it's Order. Then for the non-human villains, it's Destruction. And then for the human villains, it's Cruelty. So in Carnage's case here, he is Cruelty because he's always been a villain since his base look that he got like 7 years ago. But interestingly enough, Venom, who also started as a villain, is also Cruelty. So as you can see there, his instinct is Cruelty. Now, this matters for a couple of reasons. It's not related to the video, but it matters for when you're rolling their artifact. Because if you want it to match, you have to have it match the right instinct. It has to say Cruelty there instead of Destruction, right? But it matters for the other reason, which is the striker buff. If you're just going for the maximum buff, what you want to do is find another character with the highest build possible that you have that has the same matching instinct. That is how you match striker buffs to be as good as possible, as strong as possible. That's why when you have Tier 4 humans, they're going to buff other Tier 4 humans with the maximum level 6 buff. So in this case, for Venom, you're looking for Cruelty. You can always sort here at the top, and it'll just highlight in green the one that you want. So even if you're still really confused and you have a character, let's say Black Bolt, you're like, I don't know what his instinct is, Alex. You go to the striker page, you click all, and then it'll show you, okay, he's Order, which means he's a non-human hero. Even though his newest uniform, again, turns him into a villain, it does not matter. So you go over to Order, and you're like, oh, okay, so here are all of the non-human heroes that I could use. And again, you can see Jean is now a villain, but it doesn't matter because her base look is hero, right? You have other characters here who had villain uniforms in the past or whatever. It doesn't matter at all. It just matters what their base uniform, their base look is, and that is what determines their instinct. So if you're just going for maximum power there, if you're just going for a maximum striker buff in terms of having a level 6 buff, then yes, you need a Tier 4 with a matching instinct. As you can see here, if I drop down to a Tier 3, whether they're level 70 or level 80, it doesn't matter. You're going to get a level 5 buff. And then if you, for whatever reason, have a Tier 2, then it's going to go down to a level 4 buff from level 5. And then if you have no other, like if you don't have anyone for some reason who matches the same instinct, then you go down to a level 3 buff. I'm pretty sure a level 3 buff is the lowest possible. I guess you could go for a level 2 buff if you have a non-matching instinct Tier 2, but at this point I feel like you kind of just be trolling yourself for no reason. So that's the first thing to remember about Tier 4s, and if you just want to get the maximum buff, like for example, I just threw Doctor Strange here on Ghost Rider because he is a Justice Instinct ally, and he's also a Tier 4. but Black Widow would give me the exact same buff. Now, Black Widow and Doctor Strange aren't necessarily going to be the same quality of striker, which is what's important to note. But in terms of the buff will be the same. Okay, the buff will be the same. So that's the first thing you need to know. Second big thing you need to know, do the striker buffs affect the character you're using? The answer very simply is no. So Ant-Man here is going to be striking for Iron Man whenever I use Iron Man's tier 4, and you can see what it looks like right here. So I pop the tier 4, Ant-Man jumps in, he's got all the ants, he's jumping up, he's slamming down, it looks really cool, yes. Now if you take a look at Ant-Man's tier 4 skill, you can see that it heals him. Oh man, that's so good. So basically he's going to get Ant-Man gets 4 seconds of invincibility and he gets a heal. Does that mean Iron Man gets these things? No, he doesn't. He just does it, just straight up. It's Ant Raid, it's for Ant-Man, that's it. There is no striker skill in the game that applies its buffs to the main character. Now, having said that, and let me say it one more time, there are no buffs in the game that the striker provides to the main character. So here, Spider-Man heals for 30%, he gets penetration, he gets accumulation. That does not affect Hulk. That does not apply to Hulk, it only applies to Spider-Man's skill. However, there is one instance of a character where the main character buffs the striker, and it's Black Bolt, and it says it explicitly in his tier 4 skill. So you got to read very carefully, but at the top there in orange it says changes striker, this text right here, changes striker character abilities to tier 4 character abilities, which means Black Bolt. All abilities including stats, buffs, and types. So what that means is whoever you place as the striker for Black Bolt, when they come out, right, when they activate, so when Cable activates, he's going to jump out, and he's not going to jump out with his stats, he's going to jump out with Black Bolt's stats. He's not going to jump out with his blast typing, he's going to jump out and attack with a universal typing, because he takes everything. He takes all abilities, including stats, buffs, and types. It also means any buffs that Black Bolt has at the time will apply to Cable. So this actually matters a little bit more because it means that Black Bolt can make more value and more use out of bad strikers, because he basically juices up the striker. So basically you almost can't have a bad striker for Black Bolt, because even if you were not dumb, but even if you were trolling and you used like a tier 2 striker, like, oh, Whiplash, this is so funny. Whiplash's stats, buffs, and his typing are going to change to match Black Bolt when he comes out and strikes. So he's not going to do much damage in terms of how many hits, but he'll still do a lot of damage in terms of the numbers, because he's going to be taking the 97,000 energy attack that Black Bolt has, etc., etc. Now, this effect is unique to Black Bolt, so I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I do want to highlight it because it is unique, and it does break a rule that otherwise states, you know, the tier 4 character has their buffs that don't mix with the striker, and the striker has their buffs which don't mix with the tier 4 character. Okay, so we know about Instinct, we know about the Black Bolt exception, and we know about, you know, the levels of buffs from 6 down to 2. Now, what about specific game modes? Because this is where tier 4 strikers really show a lot of their value. And mainly you're going to be focusing on ABX and ABL, but we also have a small segment for PvP in just a second. So for ABX and ABL, what you want to remember are basically 2 rules. The first rule is that if the character needs an ability, if the character needs to cancel and they don't have it, then you want to give the tier 4 striker the ability, essentially. So if you go over to Alliance Battle and you check what okay, today it's Paralyze. So if you're going to be using a character that doesn't have paralysis, then you want to give the striker, you want to give them a striker that has paralysis. So let's take a look at Luna here. Let's pretend Luna doesn't have paralysis. Oh, I'm using Thor. Does Thor provide paralysis? He does. Endless Lightning Strike, you can see there in the brown, it applies bleed, shock, stun, and then paralysis. So this is a big use case for tier 4 strikers. And again, it doesn't have to be a tier 4 character. So I can use Storm here, who, guess what? She actually has stun. That doesn't work. Never mind. What about Odin? Odin applies paralysis. This is going to take a little bit of trial and error because you're going to have to look. Some characters apply shock, but they don't apply paralysis. Some characters you wouldn't think, oh wow, Kang's first skill applies paralysis. I didn't know that. You sort of just have to go and test out trial and error. You can't really filter by skill effects, but hey, look at that. Thena's 4th skill, if you put her as a striker, also applies paralysis. So if for whatever reason I didn't have any of these characters here, but I had Kang and Thena, you know what? I would probably go with one of them. But there is a reason why you would choose one over the other, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But generally, this is a really big value play for ABX and ABL because there's basically no character in the game that has all 6 cancels, right? Paralysis, silence, burn, and then snare, fracture, shock. There's no character that has all 6. Some characters have like 4 or 5, but you're still going to need to bring someone in to do some canceling for you, right? So Magneto, amazing ABX character, amazing ABL character, but sometimes he requires a striking cancel from specific characters, so you go in and you look for who you need, right? There's so many different combinations here that it's not really worth the time for me to list them out one by one. But basically, if you go into the game mode and you see like, oh, I'm going to use Venom, but he doesn't have whatever, shock. Okay, so I have to go and find a character. So maybe I'm going to filter by cruelty first. And then in this case, I know, right, he has paralysis. Okay, but I need shock. I don't need paralysis. What about Sin? Sin has silence. That's great. He's got burn and silence. That's also great, but not what I need. Oh, here we go. Taskmaster has shock. That's great. So now I'm going to set Taskmaster. And then when I press my tier 4 skill, Taskmaster is going to come out and he's going to apply shock right there actually, and it's going to cancel the tier 4 the ABL ability. So this is a really big use case for tier 4 strikers. And again, you don't need the striker to be tier 4. I just call it a tier 4 striker because the tier 4 character has a striker slot, right? So hopefully that makes sense. If you have more questions about that for specific characters and specific scenarios, then we can answer it either down below in the comments or on something like the new meta Discord. Perfect place to do that, or you can always hit me up on Twitter. Let's say that's not the case you're in. Let's say you have a character who can already cancel the Frost Beast or Surtur, and you just want to get the absolute best tier 4 striker. Well, then you have 3 options. For ABX, your options are Black Widow or Ghost Rider. They're just by far the best strikers. In ABX, you want a striker that has as many hits as possible on their skill. Obviously, it matters that they have a strong skill a little bit, but it also mostly matters how many hits are on it. However, keep in mind that the build you have on the character also matters for things like ABX and ABL. So having a Mighty Rage on my tier 4 Ghost Rider is actually going to probably do a lot more to my score than having my tier 4 Black Widow, who we know sort of by default is weaker than Ghost Rider, but also in my case has a much weaker build, right? She has very few Odin's Blessings, she has no CTP. In that case, it does matter. So giving them an offensive CTP, an energy or a rage, something like that, actually matters if you're going to be using them frequently in ABX as a sort of tier 4 striker that you're not using just to cancel. For ABL, it's pretty much the same situation, except you're going to swap Black Widow for Thor. So in this case, your 2 best strikers for ABL, instead of being Black Widow and Ghost Rider, are Thor and Ghost Rider. In either case, Ghost Rider kind of comes out on top. He's an amazing striker now for ABX and ABL because he uses Hellfire Chainsaw. It does insane amounts of damage. It's just very, very, very strong. But if you don't have Ghost Rider for whatever reason and you have Thor, you can use Thor because his Endless Lightning Strike, it's actually really funny. They're both, oh no, they're not both called Endless. But anyways, his Endless Lightning Strike does a lot of damage as well and helps you rack up a score, a high score. In either event, you want a character, like I said, for ABX that has a good build, right? A character with no build, even if it's Thor or Ghost Rider, is probably going to do worse than a character with a build. But yeah, Black Widow, Ghost Rider, and Thor are your 3 best options for just the highest amount of damage, the highest amount of points and burst for those game modes, specifically if you don't need them to cancel and interrupt the Frost Beast or Surtur. What about PvP? It's really simple for this game mode. You just take 4 of the best PvP characters minus Jean Grey, and you use them as strikers because of their insane striker skills. So Hulk, Spider-Man, Wolverine, and Adam Warlock are your 4 best. Now, there are other options for sure, but these 4 are far and away the best and most frequent that I see being used for things like, Timeline Battle, Alliance Conquest, Alliance Tournament, Otherworld Battle, because of how strong their striker skill is. So let me just explain. You take a character like Spider-Man, who's already insane as a PvP character, and then you allow him to use his 4th skill, Web Bomb, which has iframe ignore. This is basically the trend that you're going to see for all of these PvP strikers. They all use their best iframe ignore skill, and they're all very, very strong PvP characters. So yeah, that's for Spider-Man. Okay, so what about for Wolverine, Alex? What about Wolverine? Well, he uses his 5th skill, which is also his strongest skill, which also gives him iframe ignore. So yeah, he gets iframe ignore, and he pops the 5, and he just shreds your team. So yeah, that's pretty damn good. What about Hulk, Alex? Does Hulk use his 4th skill with iframe ignore? You bet Hulk does use his 4th skill with iframe ignore. You can see the pattern here. It's pretty straightforward. Yeah, you just take the best PvP characters and you look at which ones do their best skills. In this case, unfortunately, Jean Grey does her 2nd skill. It's not bad, but it's not as good as like 5 or 4 or even maybe not 3, but 5 or 4. It does have iframe ignore. It just doesn't do as much damage. It doesn't have nearly as much burst damage as the 4 or 5 that Hulk, Spidey, and Wolverine do. Jean is still a good striker for PvP, I would say. She's just not nearly as popular as the 3 that I just mentioned. Adam is the last striker that I'll mention here as far as for PvP. I don't use him that often, but Adam is also a decent option because of his ability to just do a lot of damage, right? And usually people have Adam built very high, like very well, you know, very, very high level builds. And in Adam's case, he just does a lot of damage. It's not his iframe ignore skill. It's not his 2nd skill. If it was his 2nd skill, then yeah, Adam would be easy, you know, easy clap, tier 4 striker because of how insane evolutionary strike is. But light suppression is not bad. Not a bad skill at all. Just doesn't have the iframe ignore, doesn't have the penetration. But yeah, that's basically how it goes for PvP. You have to experiment with other options, but those 4 are far and away the best options. I would say if you don't have any of those and you want a good PvP striker, I would just look through your roster for another character that has an iframe ignore burst skill. Now, there's some tricky situations here because there are some other characters who you might think are good because they're good PvP characters. So we could take, for example, Carnage. Be like, oh, Carnage is good here because of PvP, so maybe he'll be good for as a striker. But you can take a look here. He does his 2nd skill. It's like kind of one of his shittier skills. If he did his 4th skill, it would be a different story. So again, it's just trial and error to see what's going on, or maybe even honestly his 3rd skill would have been better, blood tentacles. But yeah, that's kind of just trial and error based on who you have on your roster and based on what the skill does. But yeah, for PvP, it's more important that the skill itself has a lot of good PvP effects. So penetration, ignore iframe, removing buffs, etc. Those are more important than anything else. And then, of course, secondly, what's important is how much burst damage the skill has. If it doesn't have those effects and it doesn't have a high burst damage, then it's probably not a good striker skill for PvP. So that about wraps it up for tier 4 striker skills. Hopefully that helps you out and allows you to mix and match to get the most value out of your roster when setting up your tier 4s for success. Again, it's a very complex topic. There's so many different permutations. So if you have more questions, do not hesitate to hit us up on Discord, Twitter, etc. For all that MFF gaming knowledge and help. Thanks so much for watching. Smash the like button, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.